The elevator climbed 23 floors in complete silence, carrying a 12-year-old girl who clutched a worn manila folder against her chest like a shield. Emma Rodriguez had never been this high up in a building before, never seen the city stretch out below her like a patchwork quilt of dreams and disappointments. Her sneakers squeaked against the polished floor as she stepped out into the marble lobby of Meridian Tech Solutions, where everything gleamed with the kind of success her father had always talked about but never quite reached. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The receptionist, a woman with perfectly manicured nails and a smile that seemed painted on, looked up from her computer screen with barely concealed surprise. Children didn't usually walk into corporate headquarters alone, especially not children wearing second-hand jeans and a backpack decorated with cartoon characters that had seen better days. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, her voice carrying that particular tone adults used when they were trying to be polite, but really wanted to know why you were bothering them. Emma straightened her shoulders, a gesture she had learned from watching her father prepare for job interviews that never quite went the way they hoped. "I'm here for the junior developer internship interview," she said, her voice steady despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs like a bird trying to escape its cage. The receptionist blinked twice, clearly processing this information. "The junior developer internship is for high school seniors and college students. Are you perhaps here with a parent or guardian?" "No, ma'am," Emma replied, adjusting her grip on the folder. "I'm here by myself. I submitted an application 3 weeks ago, and I received an email confirmation for today at 2 o'clock. The woman's perfectly shaped eyebrows climbed toward her hairline as she began typing something into her computer with the rapid-fire intensity of someone who had just encountered a problem that didn't fit into any of her usual categories. Emma could hear the soft clicking of her acrylic nails against the keyboard, a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the pristine lobby with its towering windows and abstract art. That probably cost more than her father made in 6 months. "What's your name, sweetie?" the receptionist asked, though her tone suggested she was already planning to send Emma home with a pat on the head and maybe a business card as a consolation prize. "Emma Rodriguez," she answered, spelling out her last name carefully. "Rodriguez." The typing stopped abruptly. The woman stared at her screen for a long moment, then looked back at Emma with an expression that had shifted from polite dismissal to something that might have been confusion or possibly concern. "Emma Rodriguez," she repeated slowly, as if testing the words. "Age 12, currently enrolled at Lincoln Middle School. Submitted a portfolio including 3 fully functional mobile applications and a recommendation letter from Dr. Patricia Mills at the University of Chicago Computer Science Department." Emma nodded, feeling a small spark of pride despite her nervousness. "Yes, ma'am, that's me." The receptionist picked up her phone and pressed a button. "Mr. Carter, I have a situation here in the lobby that I think you need to handle personally." There was a pause, and Emma could hear the muffled sound of a voice on the other end of the line. "No, sir, it's not a security issue. It's more of a unique circumstance. The Rodriguez interview is here." Another pause. "Sir, I think you should come down and see this for yourself." She hung up the phone and turned back to Emma with a smile that seemed more genuine now, though still tinged with bewilderment. "Someone will be down to see you in just a moment. Would you like some water while you wait?" Emma accepted the water gratefully, her throat having gone dry somewhere between the 20th and 23rd floors. She took a seat in one of the leather chairs that was so deep she felt like she might disappear into it entirely, her feet barely touching the ground. The folder rested on her lap, containing printouts of her code, screenshots of her applications in action, and a letter of recommendation that she had read so many times she could recite it from memory. The elevator dinged, and a man emerged who looked like he had stepped out of a magazine about successful business people. His suit was charcoal gray and perfectly tailored. His hair was silver at the temples in a way that suggested wisdom rather than age, and his shoes were polished to a mirror shine. But it was his eyes that caught Emma's attention. Dark brown and sharp with intelligence, the kind of eyes that seemed to see everything and forget nothing. This was David Carter, Chief Technology Officer of Meridian Tech Solutions, though Emma didn't know that yet. What she did know was that he was walking directly toward her with a purposeful stride that suggested he was not a man who wasted time on things that weren't important. "Miss Rodriguez?" he said, extending his hand in a gesture that was both professional and oddly respectful, as if he were greeting a business partner rather than a 12-year-old girl in sneakers. "I'm David Carter. I understand you're here for an interview." Emma stood up quickly, nearly dropping her folder in the process, and shook his hand with the firm grip her father had taught her. "Yes, sir. Thank you for meeting with me." David studied her for a moment, taking in everything from her carefully combed hair to her nervous but determined expression. "I have to admit, Miss Rodriguez, when I saw your application, I assumed there had been some kind of mistake. We don't typically interview candidates who are still in middle school." "I understand that, sir," Emma replied, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "But I also believe that age shouldn't be the only factor in determining someone's capabilities. I've been coding since I was 8 years old, and I've created applications that solve real problems for real people." Something flickered in David's eyes, a spark of interest that hadn't been there a moment before. "Is that so? And what kind of problems have you been solving, Miss Rodriguez?" Emma opened her folder and pulled out a photograph, a printout from her phone that showed an elderly woman smiling at the camera while holding a smartphone. "This is Mrs. Chun from my neighborhood. She's 87 years old and lives alone. She was having trouble remembering to take her medications, and her family was worried about her. So I created an app that not only reminds her when to take her pills but also sends a notification to her daughter if she misses a dose for more than an hour." She pulled out another photograph, this one showing a young man in a wheelchair navigating what appeared to be a busy sidewalk. "This is Carlos. He's a sophomore at my school, and he was struggling with finding accessible routes around the city. The existing apps were either outdated or didn't account for temporary obstacles like construction. So I built an app that uses real-time crowdsourced data to help people with mobility challenges find the best routes." David accepted the photographs, studying them with the same attention he might give to a complex financial report. "These are impressive solutions," he said. "But creating an app and getting it to market are very different things. How did you handle the technical challenges of deployment and user acquisition?" Emma felt a thrill run through her. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." This was exactly the kind of question she had hoped someone would ask, the kind that allowed her to demonstrate that she understood not just the coding side of development, but the business side as well. For Mrs. Chun's app, I started small. I created it specifically for her needs, then tested it with 3 other elderly residents in our building. Once I had worked out the bugs and improved the user interface based on their feedback, I reached out to the local senior center. They agreed to let me present it to their technology class. She pulled out a printed email from her folder. "This is from the director of the senior center. In the 6 months since I introduced the medication reminder app, they've had 12 residents request it, and the family members have reported a 90% improvement in medication compliance." David's eyebrows rose slightly. 90% improvement. That's a significant impact. "Yes, sir. And for Carlos's accessibility app, I partnered with the Disability Services Office at the community college. They helped me conduct user testing with students and community members who use wheelchairs, walkers, and other mobility aids. The feedback was invaluable for improving the routing algorithm. She showed him another printout, this one a screenshot of App Store reviews. The app has been downloaded over 2,000 times in the past 4 months, with an average rating of 4.7 stars. More importantly, I've received messages from users in 12 different states who say it's made a real difference in their daily lives. David was quiet for a long moment, flipping through the materials Emma had provided. The lobby around them seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them in a bubble of focused attention. When he looked up, his expression had changed entirely. The polite skepticism was gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine respect. "Miss Rodriguez," he said slowly, "in my 25 years in this industry, I've interviewed hundreds of candidates for internships and entry-level positions. Most of them can talk about frameworks and programming languages, but very few understand what you seem to grasp intuitively, that technology should serve people, not the other way around." Emma felt her cheeks flush with pride, but she tried to keep her expression professional. "Thank you, sir. That's exactly what I believe." "Tell me about your development process," David continued. "When you're working on a new application, how do you approach the problem-solving aspect?" This was territory where Emma felt completely confident. She had spent countless hours thinking about this very question, refining her approach through trial and error. "I start by spending time with the people who will actually use the app," she said. "Not just asking them what they want, but observing how they currently handle the problem I'm trying to solve. People don't always know what they need, but they always know what frustrates them." She gestured as she spoke, her hands moving to illustrate her points. "For example, when I was working on the accessibility app, I spent 3 weeks riding public transportation with Carlos and some of his friends. I noticed that the biggest problems weren't always the obvious ones like stairs or narrow doorways. Sometimes it was things like bus stops that were too close to construction barriers, or sidewalks that looked accessible on a map, but were actually blocked by improperly parked cars." David nodded encouragingly. "So you prioritize user research over technical specifications?" "Exactly. Because once you really understand the user's experience, the technical requirements become much clearer. And if you build something that truly solves a problem people face every day, they'll forgive a lot of imperfections in the interface or performance." "What about scalability?" David asked. "How do you think about growing an application from a few dozen users to potentially millions?" Emma paused, considering the question carefully. "I think scalability starts with the foundation. When I'm writing code, I try to build with growth in mind, using modular architecture and clean separation of concerns. But I also think scalability is about more than just technical infrastructure. It's about building systems that can adapt to different use cases and different types of users." She pulled out her phone and opened one of her applications. "When I first created the medication reminder app for Mrs. Chun, it was very specific to her routine and her medications. But as I started working with other users, I realized that everyone's needs were slightly different. So I redesigned it to be configurable. Users can set their own schedules, add custom medication types, and choose their preferred notification methods." David examined the app interface, swiping through different screens with the practiced eye of someone who evaluated software for a living. "This is remarkably sophisticated for a solo project. What development tools are you using?" "I do most of my development in React Native for cross-platform compatibility," Emma replied. "I use Firebase for the back-end services because it handles authentication and data synchronization really well, and it's cost-effective for smaller applications. For the accessibility app, I integrated with several mapping APIs and had to build custom algorithms for route optimization based on different mobility requirements." "Have you worked with any collaborative development tools? Version control, project management, that sort of thing?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "I use Git for version control, I learned the hard way how important that is when I accidentally deleted 3 days' worth of work on my first major project. I've also experimented with agile methodologies, even though I'm usually working alone. I find that breaking projects into sprints helps me stay focused and makes it easier to incorporate. User feedback. David was silent for another moment, studying Emma with an intensity that made her wonder if she had said something wrong. Finally, he spoke. "Miss Rodriguez, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Why? Do you want this internship? What are you hoping to gain from it?" Emma had rehearsed an answer to this question, but sitting here in this gleaming lobby, talking to someone who clearly understood and respected her work, the rehearsed words felt inadequate. She decided to tell the truth instead. "My dad is a software developer too," she said quietly. "Or he was, before the company he worked for downsized and eliminated his position. He's been looking for work for 8 months now, and every interview he goes to, they tell him his skills are outdated or he doesn't have experience with the latest frameworks." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "I watch him apply for jobs every day, and I see how hard it is for him to stay positive. He's incredibly smart and dedicated, but the industry changes so fast that if you're out of work for even a few months, suddenly you're behind." She looked directly at David, her dark eyes serious beyond her years. "I don't want to just learn how to code better, Mr. Carter. I want to understand how the industry really works. I want to know how decisions get made about which technologies to adopt and which candidates to hire. I want to be part of creating systems that value what people can contribute, not just what's on their resume." David was quiet for a long time. After she finished speaking, when he finally responded, his voice was softer than it had been before. "That's a very mature perspective, Miss Rodriguez. And a very personal one." Emma nodded. "I know I'm young, and I know I don't have formal experience in a corporate environment. But I learn fast, I work hard, and I care about building things that matter. If you give me a chance, I promise I won't waste it." The lobby around them had grown busier as the afternoon wore on, with people in business attire walking purposefully between elevators and conference rooms. But in their corner, time seemed suspended. David Carter, who had built his career on making quick, decisive judgments about technology and talent, found himself facing a decision unlike any he had encountered before. "Miss Rodriguez," he said finally, "I'd like you to meet some of my colleagues. Would you be willing to come upstairs for a more formal interview?" Emma's heart jumped, but she kept her voice steady. "Yes, sir, I'd be honored." As they walked toward the elevator, David found himself thinking about his own daughter, who was about Emma's age. Sarah was bright and curious, but she had never shown the kind of focused determination he was seeing in this 12-year-old girl, who had somehow convinced herself that she belonged in a corporate boardroom. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor passed in comfortable silence. Emma watched the floors tick by, each number representing another step into a world that was both foreign and familiar. She had dreamed of working in a place like this, surrounded by other people who understood the satisfaction of solving complex problems with elegant code. The doors opened onto a floor that was markedly different from the formal lobby below. Here, the atmosphere was more relaxed, with open workspace areas where people sat at standing desks or gathered around whiteboards covered in diagrams and flowcharts. The walls were lined with monitors displaying everything from code repositories to system performance metrics, and Emma could hear the quiet hum of productive work in progress. "This is our main development floor," David explained as they walked. Past clusters of programmers hunched over their keyboards. "Most of our mobile and web applications are built here, along with the back-end systems that support them." Emma noticed that several people looked up as they passed, their expressions curious rather than dismissive. She wondered what they were thinking, seeing a 12-year-old girl walking through their workspace with the CTO, Did they assume she was someone's daughter visiting for career day? Did they have any idea why she was really here? They reached a conference room with glass walls that offered a panoramic view of the city beyond. David gestured for Emma to take a seat at the polished table while he stepped outside to make a phone call. Through the glass, she could see him speaking quietly to someone, his expression serious and thoughtful. Emma used the time alone to review her materials once more, making sure everything was organized and accessible. She had prepared for this moment for weeks, but now that it was actually happening, she felt the weight of all the unknowns. What would they ask her? What would they expect her to know? And most importantly, would they see past her age to the skills and passion she had spent years developing? The door opened, and David returned with two other people. The first was a woman in her 40s with short auburn hair and laugh lines around her eyes, dressed in dark slacks and a sweater that looked both professional and approachable. The second was a younger man, probably in his late 20s, with the slightly rumpled appearance of someone who spent more time thinking about code than clothing. "Miss Rodriguez," David said, "I'd like you to meet Jennifer Walsh, our Director of Mobile Development, and Marcus Kim, one of our senior developers who specializes in accessibility and user experience design." Emma stood to shake hands with both of them, noting that Jennifer's grip was firm and confident, while Marcus seemed genuinely excited to meet her, his smile warm and unguarded. "David tells us you've built some interesting applications," Jennifer said as they all took seats around the table. "We'd love to hear more about your work." For the next hour, Emma walked them through her projects in detail, demonstrating her apps on her phone and explaining the technical decisions she had made along the way. Jennifer asked probing questions about her development process, while Marcus was particularly interested in her approach to user interface design and accessibility considerations. "I have to say," Marcus said at one point, "your work on the mobility assistance app addresses several pain points that our own accessibility team has been struggling with. The crowdsourced obstacle reporting feature is particularly clever." Emma felt a surge of validation. "Thank you. That feature actually came from Carlos, one of my beta testers. He pointed out that official city data about accessibility is often months out of date, but if users can report problems in real time, everyone benefits." "Have you thought about monetization strategies for your applications?" Jennifer asked. "How do you balance creating social good with building sustainable businesses?" It was a question Emma had wrestled with extensively. "I think there's a false choice between doing good and making money," she said carefully. "The medication reminder app, for example. I keep the basic version free for individual users, but I offer a premium version with additional features like family notifications and integration with pharmacy systems. Healthcare facilities and assisted living communities are willing to pay for enterprise licenses because the app reduces their liability and improves patient outcomes." David leaned forward. "What kind of revenue are you generating?" Emma pulled out a folder she had kept separate from the others. "Last month, the medication app generated about $400 in revenue from premium subscriptions and enterprise licenses. The accessibility app brings in about $200 from optional premium features like real-time traffic integration and advanced route customization." The three adults exchanged glances. $600 a month might not sound like much in the context of a major corporation, but for a 12-year-old operating essentially as a solo startup, it was remarkable. "That's impressive," Jennifer said, "especially since you're handling all aspects of the business yourself: development, marketing, customer support, financial management." "I've learned a lot about parts of the business I never expected to care about," Emma admitted, "like tax reporting and user privacy compliance. But I think understanding the full life cycle of a product makes me a better developer." Marcus pulled out his laptop and opened a presentation. "I'd like to show you something we've been working on here at Meridian. We're developing a platform called Accessibility First, that's designed to help developers build more inclusive applications. From the ground up. He walked through slides showing wireframes, user research data, and technical architecture diagrams. It was sophisticated work, the kind of enterprise-level platform that could potentially impact millions of users. But as Emma listened, she found herself noticing gaps in the approach, places where the corporate perspective seemed to miss nuances that her grassroots experience had taught her. When Marcus finished his presentation, he looked at Emma expectantly. "What do you think? Do you see opportunities for improvement or extension?" Emma hesitated. This was the kind of moment where she could play it safe, offering polite compliments and generic observations. But these people had invested an hour of their time in really listening to her work. They deserved her honest thoughts. "It's an impressive platform," she said slowly. "The technical architecture is solid, and I can see how it would help developers who want to incorporate accessibility features, but don't know where to start." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But I think there might be a gap between the developer experience and the end-user experience. Most of the accessibility frameworks I've seen are designed by developers for developers. They solve technical problems really well, but they don't always address the human problems that accessibility is supposed to solve." Jennifer raised an eyebrow. "Can you elaborate on that?" Emma pulled out her phone and opened her accessibility app. "When I was building this, I spent a lot of time with users who have different types of mobility challenges. What I learned is that accessibility isn't just about compliance with technical standards. It's about understanding how people actually move through the world." She showed them a screen that displayed route options with detailed annotations. "For example, this route is technically wheelchair accessible according to city data. It has curb cuts and the sidewalks are wide enough. But users told me it's actually really difficult because there's a steep hill that's exhausting to navigate, especially if you're using a manual wheelchair." Marcus leaned in to look at the screen more closely. "So your algorithm weighs factors like grade and surface quality, not just binary accessibility markers." "Exactly. And it learns from user behavior. If people consistently choose longer routes that avoid certain areas, the system starts to understand why and can make better recommendations for future users." David had been quiet during this exchange, but now he spoke up. "Miss Rodriguez, what you're describing sounds like a machine learning approach to accessibility optimization. That's graduate-level computer science." Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I don't know if I'd call it machine learning exactly. I'm just trying to pay attention to patterns in user data and use that information to make better predictions." "That's exactly what machine learning is," Jennifer said with a smile. "You're implementing sophisticated algorithms intuitively, without getting bogged down in academic terminology." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, ranging across topics from data privacy to internationalization to the ethics of algorithmic decision-making. Emma found herself holding her own in discussions that would have challenged many graduate students, not because she had formal training in these areas, but because she had encountered these issues firsthand in her own work. Finally, David glanced at his watch. "Miss Rodriguez, I want to thank you for a fascinating conversation. You've given us a lot to think about." Emma's heart sank slightly. That sounded like the kind of thing people said when they were trying to end an interview politely. "Thank you for your time," she said, beginning to gather her materials. "I know this was an unusual situation." "It was unusual," David agreed, "but in the best possible way." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. When he turned back, his expression was thoughtful. "Miss Rodriguez, I'm going to be honest with you. We've never had an intern your age, and I'm not entirely sure how to handle the logistics. There would be legal considerations, educational requirements, insurance issues." Emma nodded, trying to keep the disappointment out of her voice. "I understand. However," David continued, "I also can't ignore what I've seen here today. You have a level of practical experience and intuitive understanding that most of our entry-level hires don't demonstrate until they've been with us for several months." He exchanged glances with Jennifer and Marcus, some unspoken communication passing between them. "What if we structured something that worked within the constraints of your age and school schedule? A part-time consulting arrangement where you could work on specific projects that align with your interests and expertise?" Emma felt her pulse quicken. "What kind of projects?" "Well," Marcus said, "we could definitely use your input on the Accessibility First platform. Your user experience insights could help us bridge that gap you identified between technical compliance and real-world usability." Jennifer nodded. "And I'd love to have you work with our mobile development team on user research and beta testing. Your approach to community-based validation could inform how we handle product launches." David returned to his seat at the table. "Miss Rodriguez, what I'm thinking is this: a 6-month consulting contract, 15 hours per week, working primarily on accessibility and user experience projects. You'd attend some meetings remotely, spend time on user research and testing, and provide recommendations for product development." He paused, studying her reaction. "The compensation would be $15 per hour, which is our standard rate for specialized consulting work." Emma did the math quickly in her head. 15 hours times $15 times roughly 26 weeks would be nearly $6,000. It was more money than she had ever imagined earning, but more than that, it was recognition that her work had real value in a professional context. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice barely steady, "I would be honored to accept that offer." "Excellent," David said, extending his hand across the table. "Welcome to Meridian Tech Solutions, Miss Rodriguez. I think this is going to be a very interesting partnership." As Emma shook his hand, she felt like she was stepping across a threshold into a future she had dreamed about, but never quite believed was possible. At 12 years old, she was about to become the youngest consultant in Meridian's history, working alongside some of the most talented developers in the city on projects that could impact thousands of users. But even as excitement coursed through her, a part of her mind was already thinking about her father, sitting at home scrolling through job listings and wondering if he would ever find a company that valued his experience and dedication. She thought about the conversation she would have with him that evening, and how his face would light up when she told him that someone had finally recognized that Rodriguez's family intelligence and determination were worth investing in. The meeting concluded with handshakes and promises to follow up with paperwork and scheduling details. As David walked Emma back to the elevator, she found herself looking at the bustling development floor with new eyes. In a few weeks, she would be part of this world, contributing to projects that mattered and learning from people who shared her passion for building solutions that made life better for others. "Miss Rodriguez," David said as they waited for the elevator, "I have one last question for you." Emma looked up at him expectantly. "Your father, the software developer you mentioned, is he still looking for work?" Emma's heart jumped. "Yes, sir. He's been interviewing, but nothing has worked out yet." David nodded thoughtfully. "Would you mind if I took a look at his resume? We don't have any openings in his specialty area right now, but I know people throughout the industry. Sometimes it's just a matter of getting in front of the right person." As the elevator doors opened and Emma stepped inside, she realized that this day had exceeded every expectation she had dared to hold. She was going home not just with a consulting contract that would validate her work and support her family, but with the possibility that her father's long struggle to find employment might finally be coming to an end. The elevator descended through the floors, carrying her back toward the marble lobby where this adventure had begun just a few hours earlier. But the girl who emerged at ground level was different from the one who had arrived clutching a manila folder and hoping for a chance. She was still 12 years old, still wearing second-hand clothes and cartoon-decorated sneakers, but she was also now a professional consultant, a recognized expert in her field, and living proof that talent and determination could overcome any obstacle. As she walked out into the afternoon sunlight, Emma Rodriguez was already planning her first project recommendations and thinking about how she could use this opportunity, not just to advance her own career, but to create pathways for other young people who had big dreams and the skills to achieve them. The real work was just beginning. The coffee shop on 5th Street had seen better days, with its cracked vinyl booths and fluorescent lights that flickered intermittently, casting uneven shadows across the worn linoleum floor. But it served coffee for $1.50 and didn't mind if customers lingered for hours, which made it the perfect place for Carlos Rodriguez to spread out his laptop, notebooks, and the growing stack of rejection letters that had become an unwelcome fixture in his daily routine. At 42, Carlos had the kind of face that suggested both intelligence and weariness, with deep brown eyes that lit up when he talked about code but had grown dim after months of unemployment. His fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency as he updated his LinkedIn profile for the 3rd time that week, trying to find the magic combination of keywords that would convince some algorithm that 15 years of software development experience was worth more than the 8-month gap in his employment history. The bell above the door chimed, and Carlos looked up to see his daughter practically floating through the entrance, her backpack bouncing with each excited step. Emma's face was radiant with the kind of joy that only came from having your biggest dreams suddenly become reality, and for a moment Carlos felt his own spirits lift just from witnessing her happiness. "Dad," Emma called out, sliding into the booth across from him with barely contained energy. "You're not going to believe what happened today." Carlos closed his laptop and gave her his full attention, the way he always did when Emma had something important to share. Over the years, he had learned that his daughter's excitement usually preceded announcements that ranged from the wonderfully surprising to the mildly terrifying, and her current expression suggested this would be somewhere on the higher end of that spectrum. "Let me guess," he said with a slight smile. "Your computer science teacher finally agreed to let you redesign the school's website?" Emma shook her head vigorously. "Better. Way better." She pulled out her phone and showed him a photo she had taken of herself standing in the Meridian Tech Solutions lobby, her small figure dwarfed by the towering windows and marble columns. "I got the internship, Dad, the one I applied for without telling you." Carlos blinked, certain he had misheard. "The internship? Emma, what internship? And what do you mean you applied without telling me?" His daughter took a deep breath, clearly preparing for a conversation she had been rehearsing in her head during the entire bus ride from downtown. 3 weeks ago, I saw a posting on Meridian's website for a junior developer internship. I know it said it was for high school seniors and college students, but I thought maybe if I showed them my apps and explained my experience, they might make an exception." Carlos felt a mixture of pride and panic rising in his chest. "Emma, you can't just apply for jobs without discussing it with me first. There are legal issues, insurance considerations, not to mention the fact that you're 12 years old." I know, Emma said quickly. "But Dad, they didn't care about my age once they saw what I could do. I spent 2 hours with their CTO and their development team, and they offered me a consulting contract. 15 hours a week, $15 an hour, working on accessibility and user experience projects." Carlos stared at his daughter, trying to process what she was telling him. Emma had always been exceptional, had always surprised him with her insights and capabilities, but this was beyond anything he had imagined possible. "They offered you a consulting contract? A real one?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "Mr. Carter said they've never had a consultant my age, but they were impressed with my work on the medication reminder app and the accessibility navigation system. They want me to help them improve their platform for inclusive development." She pulled out a business card and placed it on the table between them. It was thick, expensive cardstock with the Meridian logo embossed in silver and David Carter's contact information printed in elegant typeface. Carlos picked it up, running his thumb over the raised letters as if to confirm that this was really happening. 15 hours a week, he said slowly. That's nearly $6,000 over 6 months. Emma, do you understand what this means? His daughter's expression grew more serious. I understand that it means I can help with expenses while you're looking for work. And I understand that it means someone thinks my skills are valuable enough to pay for them. Carlos felt his throat tighten with emotion. For months, he had watched his savings dwindle while he applied for job after job, each rejection chipping away at his confidence and his ability to provide for his daughter the way he wanted to. The idea that Emma, at 12 years old, was now in a position to contribute financially to their household was both incredibly proud-making and deeply humbling. I'm proud of you, he said quietly. More proud than I know how to express. But I'm also worried about you taking on this kind of responsibility at your age. Emma reached across the table and took his hand, a gesture that reminded him how much she had grown up over the past year of uncertainty and struggle. Dad, I've been coding for 4 years. I've built applications that people actually use and pay for. This isn't about responsibility I'm not ready for. This is about opportunity. I've been preparing for my whole life. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both of them processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. Around them, the coffee shop continued its familiar rhythm of customers coming and going, conversations rising and falling, the espresso machine hissing and gurgling as it produced drinks that would fuel late-night study sessions and early morning meetings. There's something else, Emma said eventually. Mr. Carter asked about you. He wanted to know if you were still looking for work. Carlos felt his pulse quicken. What did you tell him? I told him you've been interviewing for 8 months, but haven't found the right fit yet. He asked if you'd be willing to send him your resume. The business card suddenly felt heavier in Carlos's hand. He wants to see my resume? Why? Emma shrugged. He said they don't have openings in your specialty area right now, but he knows people throughout the industry. He thinks maybe it's just a matter of getting in front of the right person. Carlos looked at his daughter with a mixture of amazement and concern. In one afternoon, she had not only secured her first professional position, but had potentially opened a door for him that months of networking and cold applications had failed to provide. Emma, you can't just hand out my information without asking me first. I didn't give him your resume, she said quickly. I just told him about your situation. He said if you were interested in having him take a look at your qualifications, you could reach out to him directly. Over the next hour, Emma walked her father through every detail of her interview experience, from her nervous elevator ride to the technical discussions about machine learning algorithms to the moment when David Carter had extended his hand and welcomed her to the team. Carlos listened with growing amazement as his daughter described conversations that would have challenged many professional developers he knew. They really understood your work, he said when she finished. That's remarkable, Emma. A lot of established companies wouldn't take the time to properly evaluate unconventional applications. Emma nodded. Mr. Carter said something that stuck with me. He said most candidates can talk about technical skills, but very few understand that technology should serve people, not the other way around. I think that's why they were interested in my apps, because they solve real problems for real people. Carlos thought about his own recent interviews where hiring managers had seemed more interested in whether he knew the latest JavaScript frameworks than whether he could build systems that actually worked well for users. That's a mature perspective on software development. Most programmers don't develop that kind of thinking until they've been in the industry for several years. Maybe that's because most programmers don't start by building apps for their elderly neighbors, Emma said with a grin. When Mrs. Chun asks you why her medication reminder is so complicated to use, You learn pretty quickly that elegant code doesn't matter if people can't figure out how to benefit from it. The conversation was interrupted by Carlos's phone buzzing with a text message. He glanced at the screen and saw a notification from Indeed about new job postings that matched his profile. For a moment, he considered ignoring it. After months of disappointment, he had developed an almost Pavlovian aversion to job alerts. But something about the day's unexpected developments made him feel like maybe his luck was starting to change. More job postings, he said, showing Emma the notification. Should I even bother looking? Emma gave him a look that was both encouraging and slightly impatient. Dad, you're one of the smartest people I know. You taught me everything I know about programming, and look how that turned out. Maybe the problem isn't your skills or your experience. Maybe it's just that you haven't found the right opportunity yet. Carlos opened the job alert and scrolled through the listings, most of which looked depressingly similar to dozens of others he had applied for over the past months. But one posting caught his attention, partly because of the company name and partly because of the unusually detailed description of what they were looking for in a candidate. This is interesting, he said, tilting his phone so Emma could see the screen. It's for a senior developer position at a company called Beacon Systems. They're specifically looking for someone with experience in healthcare technology and accessibility compliance. Emma's eyes widened. Dad, that's perfect. For you, remember the project you worked on at your last job, the patient portal redesign? And you helped me with all the accessibility features in my apps. Carlos read through the job description more carefully. The role seemed to combine many of his strongest areas of expertise, and the company's mission statement emphasized their commitment to building technology that improved people's lives rather than just maximizing profits. It was exactly the kind of position he had been hoping to find. The application deadline is next week, he said. I should probably apply, but honestly, I'm getting tired of sending out resumes that disappear into automated systems. Emma leaned forward intently. What if they didn't disappear into an automated system? What if you had a way to get your application directly in front of someone who could appreciate what you bring to the table? Carlos looked at his daughter suspiciously. What are you thinking, Emma? She pulled David Carter's business card out of her backpack and placed it on the table next to Carlos's phone. I'm thinking that Mr. Carter offered to look at your resume and potentially introduce you to people in his network. Maybe Beacon Systems is exactly the kind of company he knows people at. The idea was both appealing and terrifying. Carlos had spent so many months being rejected by strangers that the thought of having someone actually advocate for his qualifications felt almost too good to be true. But it also meant reaching out to David Carter, essentially asking for help from someone who had just hired his 12-year-old daughter. I don't know, Emma. I don't want to take advantage of the professional relationship you've built. And I don't want anyone to think I'm using you to get my foot in the door. Emma gave him a look that was remarkably similar to the one he had seen her give her laptop when she was debugging particularly stubborn code. Dad, Mr. Carter specifically asked about you. He didn't have to do that. And he offered to help before he knew anything about your qualifications or what kind of work you were looking for. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I think maybe he understands something about talent being overlooked because of circumstances outside of people's control. When I walked into Meridian today, everyone assumed I was too young to be there for a serious reason. But they gave me a chance anyway, and it worked out for everyone. Carlos considered his daughter's words while staring at the business card. After months of feeling like he was shouting into the void, the possibility of having someone actually listen to what he had to offer was both hopeful and intimidating. What would I even say to him? Carlos asked. I can't just call up your new boss and ask for job search advice. Emma pulled out her phone and began typing. You don't have to call him. You can email him. Something professional but personal. Thank him for the opportunity he's given me. Mention that I told you about his offer to look at your resume, and ask if he'd be willing to provide some guidance about your job search. She showed him the draft email she had composed, which struck exactly the right tone between gratitude and professionalism. Carlos read it twice, making minor edits to better reflect his own voice, then stared at the send button for several long minutes. "This feels like a big step," he said finally. "It is a big step," Emma agreed. "But sometimes big steps are the only way to get where you're trying to go." Carlos touched the send button before he could second-guess himself any further. The email disappeared from his phone screen, carrying with it months of accumulated hope and frustration. Within minutes, his phone buzzed with an auto-reply message confirming that the email had been delivered to David Carter's inbox. "Now what?" he asked. Emma grinned. "Now we wait and see what happens. But in the meantime, you should work on updating your resume and maybe putting together a portfolio of your recent projects. If Mr. Carter does know people at Beacon Systems or other companies, you want to be ready to make a good impression." They spent the next 2 hours working side by side at the coffee shop table, Emma researching everything she could find about Meridian Tech Solutions and her upcoming projects, while Carlos revised his resume and compiled examples of his development work. It felt like the most productive afternoon either of them had experienced in months. As the sun began to set outside the coffee shop windows, casting long shadows across their table, Carlos's phone buzzed with a new email notification. The sender was David Carter, and the subject line simply said, Emma's father, opportunities. Carlos opened the email with hands that trembled slightly from caffeine and anticipation. The message was brief but encouraging. "Carlos, thank you for reaching out. I was impressed by Emma's professionalism and technical skills, and I'm always happy to help talented people find opportunities where their abilities will be valued. I've forwarded your resume to 3 colleagues who are actively hiring for senior developer positions, including the CTO at Beacon Systems. I've also copied you on emails introducing you to each of them. Expect to hear from at least one of them within the next few days. Best regards, David Carter." Carlos stared at the email, reading it 3 times to make sure he hadn't misunderstood. In the space of a single afternoon, his 12-year-old daughter had not only landed her first professional consulting contract, but had also potentially opened doors for him that months of traditional job searching had failed to provide. "Emma," he said quietly, showing her the phone screen, "I think your interview today might have changed both of our lives." Emma read the email with growing excitement. "Dad, this is amazing. He didn't just look at your resume, he actually sent it to people who are hiring right now." The next morning, Carlos woke up to find 2 emails waiting in his inbox from companies he had never heard of, but whose job descriptions seemed tailor-made for his background and interests. Both messages referenced David Carter's introduction and invited him to schedule phone interviews later that week. The 3rd email from Beacon Systems was the most detailed. The CTO, a woman named Patricia Nguyen, had not only reviewed his resume but had also looked at the patient portal project he had worked on at his previous job. Her message expressed genuine enthusiasm about his experience with healthcare technology and accessibility compliance, areas that were apparently central to Beacon's current development priorities. "Dr. Nguyen wants to meet with me in person," Carlos told Emma over breakfast. "She said David's recommendation carried a lot of weight, and she's impressed with the work I did on accessible healthcare interfaces." Emma looked up from her cereal with shining eyes. "Dad, that's incredible. When is the interview?" "Tomorrow afternoon. She said they've been looking for someone with exactly my background for several months, but they haven't been able to find candidates who really understand the intersection of technical development and user accessibility." As Carlos prepared for his interview over the next 24 hours, he found himself thinking about the conversation he had overheard between Emma and David Carter's team about the gap between technical compliance and real-world usability. His daughter, at 12 years old, had articulated something that many experienced developers struggled to understand, that building accessible technology wasn't just about following guidelines but about truly comprehending how people with different abilities interacted with digital systems. The Beacon Systems office was located in a converted warehouse in the Arts District, with exposed brick walls, high ceilings, and an atmosphere that felt more like a collaborative workspace than a traditional corporate environment. Patricia Nguyen met Carlos in the lobby, and he was immediately struck by her warmth and the way she spoke about technology as a tool for solving meaningful problems rather than just generating profit. "David Carter speaks very highly of your work," she said as they walked through the open-plan office where developers worked at standing desks, surrounded by monitors displaying medical interfaces and data visualizations. He also mentioned that your daughter is working with his team on accessibility consulting. That's quite a family accomplishment. Carlos felt a surge of pride mixed with slight embarrassment. Emma has always been exceptional. I think she gets her passion for solving real-world problems from watching me work on healthcare systems over the years. From what David described, she's taken that passion and run with it in some very impressive directions, Patricia said. Building applications that actually improve medication compliance and mobility navigation. That's the kind of impact-focused thinking we value here. At Beacon, the interview that followed was unlike any Carlos had experienced during his months of job searching. Instead of focusing on abstract technical questions or demanding that he whiteboard algorithms, Patricia showed him actual projects that Beacon was working on and asked for his thoughts on how to make them more effective for end users. "We're developing a platform for remote patient monitoring," she explained, pulling up wireframes on a large monitor. "The technical functionality is solid, but we're getting feedback from beta testers that the interface is overwhelming and difficult to navigate, especially for older users or people who aren't comfortable with technology." Carlos studied the designs, immediately recognizing several issues that his experience with healthcare interfaces had taught him to identify. "The information hierarchy is unclear," he said. "Users are seeing too many options at once, which creates decision paralysis. And the color contrast ratios don't meet accessibility standards for people with visual impairments." Patricia nodded encouragingly. "Exactly the kind of insights we need. How would you approach redesigning this to be more user-friendly?" For the next hour, Carlos found himself in the kind of technical discussion he had been craving for months. A conversation with someone who understood both the complexity of healthcare technology and the importance of making it accessible to real people with real limitations and concerns. "Your background is exactly what we've been looking for," Patricia said as the interview concluded. "Someone who combines strong technical skills with a deep understanding of accessibility and user experience in healthcare contexts. Would you be interested in joining our team?" Carlos felt a wave of relief and excitement that was so intense he had to take a moment to collect himself before responding. "I would be very interested. This is exactly the kind of work I've been hoping to find." "Excellent. I'll have our HR team reach out to you with details about compensation and benefits, but I can tell you that we're prepared to offer you a senior developer position with a starting salary of $90,000 plus equity options." As Carlos walked out of the Beacon Systems office, he found himself thinking about the strange series of events that had led to this moment. His daughter's courage in applying for an internship she wasn't technically qualified for had not only opened doors for her own career, but had also created opportunities for him that months of traditional job searching had failed to provide. He called Emma from the parking lot, barely able to contain his excitement as he told her about the interview and the job offer. "Dad, that's amazing," she said, her voice bubbling with joy. "I knew Mr. Carter would come through." "When do you start?" "Next Monday, if I accept the offer." "Which I definitely will." There was a pause, and then Emma said quietly, "I'm really proud of you, Dad, and I'm proud of us. We make a pretty good team." Carlos felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. "We do, sweetheart. We really do." That evening, Carlos and Emma celebrated at the same coffee shop where they had sat just 2 days earlier, surrounded by rejection letters and diminishing hope. Now the table between them held printouts of Emma's consulting contract and Carlos's job offer, tangible proof that persistence and talent could eventually overcome even the most discouraging circumstances. "I've been thinking," Emma said as they shared a piece of chocolate cake that neither of them could really afford, but both felt they had earned, "about what this all means for our plans going forward." Carlos raised an eyebrow. "What kind of plans are you thinking about?" Emma pulled out a notebook where she had been sketching ideas and making lists. "Well, you're going to be working on healthcare technology that helps people, and I'm going to be consulting on accessibility and user experience. Maybe there are ways we could collaborate on projects that combine both of our expertise." She showed him pages covered with diagrams and notes about potential applications that could bridge the gap between complex medical systems and user-friendly interfaces. "What if we develop tools that help healthcare providers better understand how their patients actually interact with digital systems? Or applications that make it easier for people with disabilities to access and manage their medical care?" Carlos looked at his daughter's sketches with growing amazement. At 12 years old, she was already thinking strategically about how to leverage their combined skills to create maximum impact. "These are sophisticated ideas, Emma, the kind of thing that could potentially become a business of our own someday." "Exactly," she said with a grin. "I figure we've got a few years to learn everything we can from other people, and then maybe we can strike out on our own with solutions that nobody else is building." As they walked home that night, Carlos reflected on how much their lives had changed in just 48 hours. Emma's willingness to take a risk and apply for an opportunity she wasn't technically qualified for had created a cascade of positive outcomes that neither of them could have predicted. "Emma," he said as they reached their apartment building, "I want you to know that what you did this week, applying for that internship, connecting me with David Carter, that took real courage. Not just technical skills, but the kind of bravery that most adults never develop." Emma looked up at him with an expression that was both young and wise. "I learned from watching you, Dad. You never gave up even when things got really hard. You kept applying for jobs and improving your skills and believing that eventually something would work out." Carlos unlocked their front door and they stepped into the small apartment that had felt cramped and limiting just a few days earlier, but now felt like the launching pad for adventures they were only beginning to imagine. "I think we're going to be okay," he said, pulling his daughter into a hug. "More than okay," Emma replied. "I think we're going to be extraordinary." The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Meridian Tech Solutions as Emma settled into what had become her designated workspace on the 32nd floor. 3 weeks into her consulting contract, she had fallen into a comfortable rhythm of spending Tuesday and Thursday afternoons at the office, working alongside the development team on accessibility improvements and user experience research. The other members of the team had initially been cautious around her, unsure how to interact with a 12-year-old colleague, but her technical insights and genuine curiosity had quickly won them over. Marcus Kim looked up from his monitor as Emma pulled out her laptop and connected to the office Wi-Fi. "Morning, Emma. How did the user testing session go yesterday?" Emma opened her notebook, which was filled with detailed observations from her afternoon spent at the community center, watching seniors navigate the beta version of Meridian's new patient portal interface. "Really well, actually. Mrs. Patterson figured out how to schedule appointments on her first try, and Mr. Gonzalez said the medication tracking feature was much clearer than his doctor's current system." She pulled up a document on her laptop and shared her screen with the team. but I did notice some patterns that might be worth addressing. When users encountered error messages, they tended to get frustrated and close the application entirely rather than trying to figure out what went wrong. Jennifer Walsh nodded thoughtfully from her position at the conference table. That's consistent with what we've seen in other healthcare interfaces. Error handling is always a challenge when your users might not be technically sophisticated. I think the issue might be deeper than just the error messages themselves, Emma said, pulling up screenshots from her testing sessions. When Mr. Gonzalez clicked on the wrong button and got an error, he immediately assumed he had broken something. His first instinct was to apologize, not to try again. David Carter, who had been quietly reviewing code on his tablet, looked up with interest. That's an important psychological insight. What do you think drives that reaction? Emma had been thinking about this question during her entire bus ride to the office that morning. I think it's about confidence and agency. When people aren't sure they belong in a digital space, they interpret any friction as evidence that they're doing something wrong. But when they feel like the system is designed for them, they're more likely to persist through minor obstacles. The room fell quiet as the implications of her observations settled in. Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering. So the solution isn't just better error messages. It's creating an interface that makes users feel competent and welcome from the very first interaction. Exactly, Emma said. When Mrs. Patterson successfully scheduled her appointment, she didn't just complete a task. She felt like she had mastered something new. That confidence carried over to everything else she tried in the system. Jennifer made notes on her tablet. This kind of user psychology research is exactly what we need more of. Emma, how would you feel about expanding your testing sessions to include more diverse user groups? Maybe people with different types of disabilities, or users who speak English as a second language. Emma felt a thrill of excitement. I'd love that. I actually have some ideas about how to recruit participants through community organizations and advocacy groups. As the team continued their discussion about user research methodologies, Emma found herself thinking about her father's new job at Beacon Systems. Carlos had been working there for just over 2 weeks, and every evening, he came home energized by the challenges and opportunities he was encountering. The previous night, he had shown her wireframes for a patient monitoring system that would help people manage chronic conditions from home, and they had spent an hour discussing how to make the interface intuitive for users who might be dealing with pain, fatigue, or cognitive challenges. Emma, David said, interrupting her thoughts. I have something I'd like to discuss with you privately. Do you have a few minutes after the team meeting? Emma nodded, though she felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. In her experience, requests for private conversations usually meant either very good news or very bad news, with little middle ground between the two possibilities. The team meeting continued for another hour, covering everything from security protocols to internationalization strategies. Emma contributed insights based on her community testing work, and she noticed that the other team members had begun naturally incorporating her perspectives into their development planning. It was a level of professional respect she had dreamed about but never quite believed she would experience at her age. When the meeting concluded, David gestured for Emma to follow him to his office, a glass-walled space that overlooked the city center and contained just enough personal touches to make it feel welcoming rather than intimidating. Family photos set on his desk alongside technical books and a small collection of vintage computing devices that spoke to his long history in the industry. Emma, David said as they settled into chairs facing each other, I wanted to talk to you about something that's been on my mind since your first day here. Emma felt her pulse quicken. Is there a problem with my work? David smiled. Quite the opposite. Your contributions have exceeded every expectation we had when we decided to take a chance on this arrangement. The user research insights you've provided have fundamentally changed how we think about accessibility and inclusive design. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. But I've been wondering about something. When you first came in for your interview, you mentioned that your father had been looking for work for 8 months. That's a long time for someone with his qualifications to be unemployed. Emma nodded cautiously. The tech industry can be really brutal if you're out of work for any length of time. Companies seem to assume that if you're not currently employed, there must be something wrong with your skills. That's unfortunately true, David agreed. But I've been in this industry long enough to know that employment gaps usually have more to do with market conditions and bad luck than with individual capability. He opened a folder on his desk and pulled out what appeared to be a resume and several printed emails. Emma, when your father sent me his resume, something caught my attention. His work history includes a position at Nexus Healthcare Solutions. From 2019 to 2022, Emma felt a strange sinking sensation in her stomach, though she wasn't sure why. Yes, that was his last job before the layoffs. David's expression grew serious. Emma, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Have you ever heard the name Catherine Chun in connection with your father's work? The question hit Emma like a physical blow. Catherine Chun was a name she had heard whispered in their apartment during the darkest days after her father lost his job, usually followed by words like lawsuit and wrongful termination, and we can't afford legal fees. She had never fully understood the context, but she knew it was connected to something that had gone very wrong at her father's previous job. I've heard the name, Emma said slowly. But my dad doesn't like to talk about what happened at Nexus. I know there was some kind of dispute when he was laid off, but he always changes the subject when I ask about it. David nodded gravely. Catherine Chun was a senior executive at Nexus Healthcare Solutions. She was also under federal investigation for healthcare fraud during the time your father worked there. Emma felt the blood drain from her face. Healthcare fraud? What does that mean? It means she was suspected of billing Medicare and Medicaid for services that were never provided, using falsified medical records and patient data. The investigation involved the FBI, the Department of Health and Human Services, and several other federal agencies. David pulled out a newspaper clipping from the folder. Catherine Chen was arrested 6 months ago on charges of defrauding the federal government of over $15 million. The case made national news because of the scale of the operation and the number of vulnerable patients whose medical records were compromised. Emma stared at the newspaper headline, trying to process what she was hearing. But what does this have to do with my dad? David's expression grew even more serious. Emma, according to federal court documents that became public during the investigation, your father was the person who first reported suspicious activity in Nexus's billing systems. He discovered discrepancies in patient records and brought them to the attention of company leadership. The room seemed to spin around Emma as the implications of this information began to sink in. You're saying my dad was a whistleblower? Not just a whistleblower, David said quietly. According to the FBI investigators I spoke with, your father's initial report provided the foundation for the entire federal investigation. His documentation of the fraudulent billing practices was so thorough and compelling that it gave prosecutors everything they needed to build their case. Emma felt like she might be sick. The investigators you spoke with? You called the FBI about my dad? David held up his hands in a calming gesture. Emma, I need you to understand something. When I saw your father's work history and realized he had been employed at Nexus during the period when Catherine Chen was operating her fraudulent scheme, I had to do some research. Companies in our industry take compliance and ethical issues very seriously. He leaned forward in his chair. But what I discovered wasn't evidence of wrongdoing on your father's part. Quite the opposite. I learned that Carlos Rodriguez is considered a hero by federal investigators and healthcare advocacy organizations. He risked his career to expose fraud that was stealing from taxpayers and putting vulnerable patients at risk. Emma's hands were shaking. If he's such a hero, why has he been unemployed for 8 months? Why hasn't anyone wanted to hire him? David's expression grew grim. Because Catherine Chun and her associates spent months before their arrest trying to discredit anyone who had opposed their operations. They spread rumors throughout the healthcare technology industry that your father was difficult to work with, unreliable, and had been terminated for cause. He showed Emma printouts of online forum posts and industry message boards where anonymous accounts had posted negative comments about Carlos's work performance and professional integrity. The smear campaign was sophisticated and persistent. Most hiring managers never heard the true story about your father's role in exposing the fraud. They only heard whispers that he was someone to avoid. Emma felt a surge of anger so intense it took her breath away. You mean my dad has been suffering for months because criminals were spreading lies about him, and no one bothered to check whether the rumors were true? Unfortunately, that's exactly what happened, David said. The healthcare technology industry is smaller than people realize, and negative gossip travels fast. Most companies don't have time to investigate every rumor they hear about potential hires. Emma stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and staring down at the busy street below. Does my dad know that you know about this? David shook his head. I haven't spoken to him about it yet. I wanted to talk to you first, to understand how much you knew about the situation. Emma turned back to face him. I didn't know any of this. I knew something bad had happened at his old job, but he never told me he was the one who reported the fraud. He never told me that people were spreading lies about him. Your father was probably trying to protect you from information that would upset you without helping the situation, David said gently. Parents often shield their children from adult problems, especially when those problems involve legal and financial complexities. Emma felt tears stinging her eyes. Mr. Carter, you said you spoke to FBI investigators. What exactly did they tell you about my dad? David opened another folder and pulled out printed emails. Agent Sarah Mitchell, who led the investigation into Catherine Chun's operation, told me that your father's integrity and attention to detail were instrumental in building the case that ultimately led to indictments and convictions. He read from one of the emails. Carlos Rodriguez demonstrated exceptional moral courage in reporting fraudulent activities that he could easily have ignored. His meticulous documentation and willingness to cooperate with federal investigators helped us recover millions of dollars in stolen taxpayer money and ensure that the perpetrators faced appropriate consequences. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. If the FBI thinks he's such an amazing person, why didn't they help him find a new job? Federal investigators don't typically get involved in employment issues, David explained. But Agent Mitchell did mention that she would be happy to provide a professional reference for your father if he ever needed one. Emma sank back into her chair, feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had just learned. Her father wasn't just a talented software developer who had been unlucky in his job search. He was someone who had risked everything to do the right thing, and he had paid a steep price for his integrity. Mr. Carter, she said slowly, when you recommended my dad to Dr. Nguyen at Beacon Systems, did you tell her about the Catherine Chun situation? David nodded. I gave her the full context, including the FBI investigation and your father's role as a whistleblower. Patricia was actually more interested in hiring him after she learned about his willingness to stand up for ethical principles, even at personal cost. Emma felt a surge of gratitude mixed with lingering anger about the injustice her father had endured. So Dr. Nguyen knows the truth about why he was really unemployed for so long. She knows everything, David confirmed. And she told me that Beacon Systems considers integrity and ethical courage to be among the most important qualities they look for in senior employees. Emma was quiet for several minutes, processing everything she had learned. Finally, she looked up at David with an expression that was both grateful and determined. "Mr. Carter, thank you for telling me all of this. But I need to ask you something important." David nodded encouragingly. "Are you going to tell my dad that you know about the Catherine Chen investigation?" David considered the question carefully. "That depends on what you think would be best. This is ultimately between you and your father." Emma stood up and walked to the window again, watching the flow of traffic on the street below. "I think he deserves to know that the truth is finally coming out. And I think he deserves to know that there are people in the industry who respect what he did, even if it took a while for them to learn the real story." She turned back to David. "But I want to be the one to tell him. He's been protecting me from this situation for months, and I think it's time for me to show him that I'm old enough to handle difficult truths." David smiled. "That sounds like a mature and thoughtful approach, Emma." Emma gathered her belongings, her mind racing with plans for the conversation she would have with her father that evening. "Mr. Carter, can I ask you one more thing? When you first met me, did you suspect there was more to my dad's story than what appeared on the surface?" David was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Honestly, I was impressed by your technical skills and your approach to problem solving, but what really caught my attention was your maturity and your sense of ethics. Those aren't qualities that develop in a vacuum. They're usually the result of being raised by someone who models integrity and resilience." He smiled. "When I saw the quality of person you had become at 12 years old, I knew your father must be an exceptional man, regardless of what his employment status might suggest." Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you for giving both of us a chance. Thank you for reminding me that talent and character come in many different packages," David replied. "You've taught our entire team valuable lessons about recognizing potential and looking beyond surface assumptions." As Emma rode the bus home that afternoon, she found herself seeing her father's situation with completely new eyes. The months of rejection letters and failed interviews weren't the result of inadequate skills or bad luck. They were the consequence of a coordinated attack on his reputation by people who were angry that he had exposed their criminal behavior. More than that, she realized that her father's decision to report the fraud at Nexus had been an act of tremendous courage. He had known that speaking up could jeopardize his career, but he had done it anyway because vulnerable patients were being harmed by the fraudulent billing practices. Emma thought about her own work on accessibility and user experience, and how she had always been motivated by the desire to build technology that helped people who were often overlooked or underserved. She had inherited that sense of mission from her father, who had been willing to sacrifice his own job security to protect people he had never met. By the time Emma reached her apartment building, she had decided exactly how she wanted to approach the conversation with Carlos. She wouldn't just tell him what David had revealed about the investigation. She would also tell him how proud she was to be his daughter, and how much she had learned from watching him maintain his integrity even during the most difficult periods of their lives. Carlos was in the kitchen when Emma arrived home, preparing dinner and humming quietly to himself, in a way that suggested his day at Beacon Systems had gone well. He looked up with a smile when she walked through the door. "How was your day at Meridian?" he asked. "Any interesting discoveries from your user research?" Emma set down her backpack and took a deep breath. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something important. Something about Catherine Chen and what really happened at Nexus." Carlos went very still, his expression shifting from casual interest to something that looked like carefully controlled panic. "Emma, I've told you before that the situation at Nexus is complicated adult business that doesn't concern you." Emma walked to the kitchen table and sat down, gesturing for her father to join her. "Dad, I know about the FBI investigation. I know about the healthcare fraud. And I know that you were the one who reported it." Carlos sank into the chair across from her, his face pale. "How did you find out about that?" Emma told him everything David had revealed, From the federal court documents to the conversations with FBI investigators to the smear campaign that had been conducted against his reputation. Throughout the healthcare technology industry, Carlos listened in silence, his hands folded on the table, his expression cycling through emotions ranging from shame to anger to something that might have been relief. When Emma finished speaking, he was quiet for a long time. "I never wanted you to know about any of that," he said finally. "I didn't want you to worry about things you couldn't control or understand." Emma reached across the table and took his hand. "Dad, I'm 12 years old, not 4. I can handle knowing that my father is a person who does the right thing, even when it's hard." Carlos looked up at her with eyes that were bright with unshed tears. "Emma, when I reported Catherine Chen's operation to the authorities, I knew it might destroy my career. But I also knew that if I stayed silent, vulnerable people would continue to be harmed by fraudulent billing practices." He squeezed her hand. "I made the choice I thought was right, but I've spent every day since then wondering if I should have found a different way to handle the situation. A way that wouldn't have put our financial security at risk." Emma felt her own eyes filling with tears. "Dad, you did exactly what I would have wanted you to do. You protected people who couldn't protect themselves, and you did it even though you knew there would be consequences." She stood up and moved around the table to hug him. "I'm proud of you. Not just because you're smart and talented, but because you're brave and good." Carlos held his daughter close, feeling a weight lifting from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he had been carrying. "I was so afraid you would think less of me if you knew I had been essentially blacklisted from the industry." "I could never think less of you," Emma said firmly. "If anything, knowing the truth makes me respect you even more." They spent the rest of the evening talking about the Catherine Chen investigation, the challenges Carlos had faced during his months of unemployment, and the relief he felt at finally working for a company that valued his integrity as much as his technical skills. "Dr. Nguyen told me yesterday that Beacon Systems has had inquiries from 3 other healthcare technology companies asking about my availability," Carlos said. "Apparently, word is starting to spread that I'm back in the workforce and that the rumors about my departure from Nexus were unfounded." Emma grinned. "So you're not just employed again, you're in demand." Carlos laughed. "It's a strange feeling after months of being treated like a pariah. But I'm starting to believe that maybe the worst is behind us." As they cleaned up after dinner, Emma found herself thinking about the conversation she had planned to have with David Carter the next day. She wanted to thank him not just for helping her father find employment, but for giving her the information she needed to understand the full context of their family's recent struggles. "Dad," she said as they finished loading the dishwasher, "I think there's something else you should know about Mr. Carter and the team at Meridian." Carlos looked at her curiously. "When they hired me, it wasn't just because they were impressed with my technical skills. Mr. Carter told me today that what really convinced him to take a chance on me was the fact that I had obviously been raised by someone with strong ethical principles and a commitment to using technology to help people." Carlos felt his throat tighten with emotion. "He said that?" Emma nodded. "He said that when he saw the kind of person I had become at 12 years old, he knew my father must be exceptional, regardless of what his employment status might suggest." Carlos pulled his daughter into another hug. "Emma, I don't know what I did to deserve having you in my life, but I'm grateful every single day." Emma hugged him back fiercely. "You deserve it because you're exactly the kind of person who deserves it. And now the rest of the world is starting to figure that out too." Later that night, as Emma worked on her accessibility research in her bedroom and Carlos reviewed code for his latest project at Beacon Systems, both of them felt a sense of peace that had been absent from their lives for many months. The truth about the Catherine Chen investigation was finally out in the open between them, and rather than creating distance or worry, it had brought them closer together. Emma understood now why her father had been so protective of her during the difficult months of his unemployment. He had been carrying the burden of knowing that his commitment to doing the right thing had put their financial security at risk, and he had been determined to shield her from that knowledge. But she also understood that her father's willingness to report fraud, even at personal cost, was part of what had shaped her own approach to building technology that served people rather than exploiting them. The values that had guided her work on accessibility applications and user-centered design had been modeled for her by a father who chose integrity over security. As she fell asleep that night, Emma felt a deep sense of gratitude for the strange series of events that had led them to this point. Her decision to apply for an internship she wasn't technically qualified for had not only opened doors for her own career, but had also created the opportunity for the truth about her father's situation to finally emerge. Tomorrow she would return to Meridian Tech Solutions with a fuller understanding of her family's story and a deeper appreciation for the people who had been willing to look beyond surface assumptions to see the talent and character that lay beneath. The revelation about Catherine Chun and the federal investigation had changed everything, but it had changed things for the better. The truth, as difficult as it had been to learn, had finally set them both free. The conference room at Meridian Tech Solutions buzzed with an energy that Emma had never experienced before. Representatives from healthcare organizations across 3 states had gathered for the quarterly Accessibility First platform demonstration, and she found herself seated at the main presentation table alongside David Carter, Jennifer Walsh, and Marcus Kim. At 12 years old, she was easily the youngest person in the room by at least 15 years, but the past 6 weeks of intensive collaboration had earned her a place among the technical experts presenting their collective work. Emma's laptop displayed the latest version of the patient portal interface, incorporating months of user feedback and accessibility improvements that she had helped design and test. The screen showed a clean, intuitive layout with large buttons, high contrast colors, and simplified navigation paths that had been refined through dozens of testing sessions with seniors, people with disabilities, and non-native English speakers from community organizations throughout the city. Dr. Helen Rodriguez, no relation despite the shared surname, leaned forward from her position at the far end of the conference table. As the Director of Patient Experience at Regional Medical Center, she represented one of the largest healthcare systems in the state, and her opinion could influence adoption decisions affecting hundreds of thousands of patients. "Miss Rodriguez," she said, addressing Emma directly, "I'm particularly interested in the medication management component you've developed. Can you walk us through how it addresses the compliance issues we've been struggling with?" Emma felt a familiar flutter of nerves, but she had learned to channel that nervous energy into focused presentation skills. She stood up and moved to the large wall-mounted display, using a wireless presenter remote with the confidence of someone who had spent weeks preparing for exactly this moment. "Dr. Rodriguez, the traditional approach to medication reminders focuses on scheduling and alerts," Emma began, pulling up a comparison slide that showed typical pharmacy apps alongside her redesigned interface. "But our user research revealed that compliance problems often stem from confusion and anxiety rather than simple forgetfulness." She clicked to a video testimonial from Mrs. Patterson, one of her regular testing participants, who spoke directly to the camera about her experience with the new system. "When I get too many notifications or complicated instructions, I just turn off my phone," Mrs. Patterson explained in the video. "But this new system makes me feel like I'm in control of my own care, instead of being bossed around by a computer." Emma paused the video and turned back to the audience. "We discovered that empowerment and agency were more important factors in medication compliance than convenience or automation. So we redesigned the interface to give users meaningful choices about how they want to manage their medications, rather than imposing a one-size-fits-all solution." Dr. Martinez from the Community Health Coalition raised his hand. "Can you show us specific examples of how those choices manifest in the user experience?" Emma navigated to a live demonstration of the medication management system, her fingers moving across the interface with practiced ease. Users can choose their preferred reminder style, from gentle audio chimes to visual notifications to text messages sent to family members. They can set different schedules for different medications, and they can easily adjust timing or frequency based on their daily routines. She showed how the system tracked medication adherence without being judgmental or intrusive. Instead of sending alerts about missed doses, it provided gentle check-ins and offered to adjust schedules if patterns suggested that timing wasn't working for individual users. The key insight was that people want to succeed at managing their health, Emma explained. When the technology assumes competence and provides supportive tools rather than surveillance and nagging, compliance rates improve dramatically. Jennifer Walsh stepped forward with a tablet displaying usage statistics from their beta testing program. Over the past 3 months, we've seen a 47% improvement in medication adherence among users of Emma's redesigned system compared to our previous interface. More importantly, user satisfaction scores have increased by 62%. The healthcare representatives in the room exchanged impressed glances, and Emma noticed several people taking detailed notes on their tablets and laptops. Dr. Rodriguez looked up from her notes with an expression of genuine interest. "Miss Rodriguez, these results are remarkable. But I have to ask about scalability and implementation. How do we adapt this approach to serve diverse patient populations across multiple healthcare systems?" Emma had anticipated this question and had spent considerable time working with Marcus Kim on technical architecture that could support widespread deployment. The system is built on modular components that can be customized for different healthcare providers while maintaining consistent core functionality, she said, pulling up architectural diagrams that showed how the platform could integrate with existing electronic health record systems. "We've also developed a training protocol for healthcare staff that emphasizes the importance of presenting technology as a partnership tool rather than a monitoring system. The same interface components can support very different user experiences, depending on how they're introduced and implemented." Dr. Patricia Chang from the State Department of Health Services leaned forward. "What about users who have limited English proficiency or low digital literacy? Those are some of our most vulnerable patient populations." Emma's face lit up with enthusiasm. This was an area where her community-based testing had provided particularly valuable insights. "We've been working with the International Community Center to test interfaces with users who speak Spanish, Vietnamese, Arabic, and Somali as their primary languages. What we learned is that effective multilingual design goes far beyond simple translation." She navigated to a section of the interface that demonstrated cultural adaptation features. For example, in some cultures, family members play a central role in healthcare decision-making, while in others, individual privacy is paramount. Our system allows users to configure family involvement and information sharing based on their cultural preferences and family structures. Emma showed how the system could display medication information using both text and visual symbols, with audio pronunciation guides for medication names and dosage instructions. We also discovered that digital literacy varies tremendously within language communities, so the interface adapts its complexity based on user behavior patterns, rather than making assumptions about technical sophistication. The presentation continued for another hour, with Emma fielding questions about everything from data privacy compliance to integration with insurance systems. She had prepared for weeks with David Carter and the Meridian team, but she found herself drawing most heavily on the months of direct interaction with users from her community testing programs. When the formal presentation concluded, several healthcare representatives approached Emma individually to ask more detailed questions about implementation timelines and pilot program opportunities. Dr. Rodriguez handed her a business card with contact information for Regional Medical Center's Innovation Team. Miss Rodriguez, I'd like to invite you to present this work to our executive leadership team next month. We're considering a major overhaul of our patient engagement systems, and your approach addresses several challenges we haven't been able to solve with traditional vendors. Emma accepted the business card with hands that trembled slightly from excitement and exhaustion. I'd be honored to present to your team, Dr. Rodriguez. As the healthcare representatives filed out of the conference room, David Carter approached Emma with an expression that combined pride and something that looked like concern. Emma, that was an exceptional presentation. You handled questions from some of the most demanding healthcare technology experts in the region. Emma sank into one of the conference room chairs, suddenly feeling the full weight of the afternoon's intensity. Thank you, Mr. Carter. I think it went well, but I'm not sure I'm ready for the kind of attention this might bring. David sat down next to her, his voice gentle but serious. That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. Emma, what happened in this room today is going to change things for you. Regional Medical Center serves over 2 million patients. If they adopt your accessibility framework, you'll be impacting more lives than most professional developers reach in their entire careers. Emma looked at the business cards and contact information she had collected during the meeting. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's both, David said honestly. It's an incredible opportunity to make a real difference in healthcare technology. But it's also a level of professional responsibility that most people don't encounter until they're much further along in their careers. Jennifer Walsh, who had been packing up presentation materials, joined their conversation. Emma, I want you to know that everyone on our team recognizes how much your work has contributed to the success of this platform. But David's right that you're about to face some decisions about how you want to handle the attention your work is receiving. Emma felt a familiar surge of anxiety mixed with determination. What kind of decisions? David pulled out his tablet and showed her a series of email messages that had arrived during their presentation. 3 other healthcare technology companies have reached out asking about consulting arrangements, similar to what you have with us. 2 universities want to invite you to speak at conferences about accessibility and user-centered design. And a journalist from Healthcare Technology magazine wants to interview you about your community-based testing methodology. Emma stared at the messages, feeling overwhelmed by the scope of opportunities and obligations they represented. Mr. Carter, I don't know how to handle any of this. I'm 12 years old. I don't know anything about consulting contracts or conference presentations or media interviews. Jennifer sat down on Emma's other side. That's exactly why we wanted to talk to you about this now, before things get too complicated. You don't have to say yes to every opportunity that comes your way. In fact, it would probably be smart to be selective about which commitments you take on. David nodded. Emma, your age is both an asset and a vulnerability in professional contexts. People are impressed by your technical skills and insights, but they're also fascinated by your story. That attention can be positive, but it can also become overwhelming if you're not careful about managing it. Emma thought about her father's experience with unwanted attention during the Catherine Chen investigation, when his reputation had been damaged by people who had their own agendas and didn't care about the truth. What if people start expecting me to be some kind of child prodigy spokesperson? What if they care more about my age than my actual work? That's a very mature concern, Jennifer said. And it's exactly why we think you should consider having some professional support as you navigate these opportunities. David leaned forward. Emma, what would you think about having a formal mentor relationship with someone who understands both the technical and business sides of the healthcare technology industry? Someone who could help you evaluate opportunities and make strategic decisions about your career development. Emma considered this suggestion carefully. What kind of person are you thinking about? Actually, David said with a slight smile, I was thinking about your father. Emma blinked in surprise. My dad? But he works at Beacon Systems now. He's not in the consulting business. Jennifer exchanged a glance with David. Emma, we've been having conversations with Carlos about the possibility of establishing a consulting practice that combines his healthcare technology expertise with your accessibility and user experience insights. A father-daughter team that specializes in ethical, user-centered healthcare solutions. Emma felt her pulse quicken. You mean we would work together as business partners? David nodded. Carlos has the industry experience and professional networks to handle contracts, legal issues, and business development. You have the technical innovations and community connections that are driving demand for your services. Together, you could build something that neither of you could achieve individually. Emma was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications of this proposal. The idea of working professionally with her father was both exciting and slightly intimidating. She had always looked up to him as a role model and mentor, but becoming actual business partners would change their relationship in ways she wasn't sure she could predict. Mr. Carter, she said finally, have you already talked to my dad about this idea? David shook his head. We wanted to discuss it with you first, to see how you felt about the possibility. If you're interested, we can arrange a meeting where all of us can explore the details together. Emma stood up and walked to the conference room window, looking out at the city where she had spent the past several months, discovering her own capabilities and building relationships with users whose lives had been improved by her work. The thought of expanding that impact through a formal consulting practice was thrilling, but she also felt the weight of decisions that seemed too large for someone her age to make alone. Can I ask you something honestly? She said, turning back to David and Jennifer. Do you think I'm ready for this kind of responsibility? Not just the technical work, but everything that comes with running a business and serving clients and managing professional relationships? Jennifer smiled. Emma, 6 months ago, you walked into this building as a 12-year-old with some impressive apps and a lot of determination. Since then, you've conducted user research that professional UX firms couldn't match. You've designed accessibility solutions that experts with decades of experience hadn't thought of. And you've presented to healthcare leaders who are now ready to invest millions of dollars in implementing your recommendations. David nodded. More than that, you've consistently shown judgment and ethical reasoning that most adults struggle with. When you're working with vulnerable populations, those qualities are more important than technical expertise. Emma felt a warmth spreading through her chest as she realized the people she most respected professionally had genuine confidence in her abilities. If we did decide to start a consulting practice, what would happen to my work here at Meridian? David and Jennifer exchanged another glance. Actually, David said, we were hoping that Rodriguez Consulting would consider Meridian as one of your first major clients. We'd like to transition your current work into a formal contract that gives you more independence while maintaining our collaboration on accessibility projects. Emma's eyes widened. You want to hire my consulting company that doesn't exist, yet to do work I'm already doing as your employee? Jennifer laughed. When you put it that way, it does sound a little circular. But what we're really talking about is recognizing that your contributions have outgrown the intern consultant arrangement we started with. You're ready for a partnership relationship rather than an employment relationship. Emma walked back to the conference table and picked up her laptop, closing the presentation that had consumed weeks of preparation and represented months of community research. Mr. Carter, if I do this, if my dad and I start our own consulting practice, I want to make sure we never lose sight of why we got into this work in the first place. David raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Emma gestured toward the materials from her community testing sessions, photographs of elderly users navigating interfaces and feedback forms filled out by people with disabilities. I want to promise that we'll never become the kind of consultants who care more about billable hours than about the people who actually use the systems we design. I want to build a business that stays connected to real users and real communities." Jennifer smiled. "Emma, that's exactly the kind of ethical foundation that will make Rodriguez Consulting successful in the long term. Companies are tired of working with vendors who prioritize profit over outcomes." As Emma packed up her presentation materials, she found herself thinking about the conversation she would have with her father that evening. The idea of becoming business partners represented an evolution of their relationship that felt both natural and revolutionary. They had always shared a commitment to using technology to solve meaningful problems, but formalizing that collaboration would take their partnership to an entirely new level. The bus ride home gave Emma time to mentally rehearse how she would present David Carter's proposal to her father. She knew Carlos would be proud of the opportunities that were emerging from her work, but she also suspected he might have concerns about the complexity and responsibility that a consulting practice would entail. When Emma arrived at their apartment, she found Carlos in the living room, working on his laptop while dinner simmered in the slow cooker. He looked up with the warm smile that had become a regular fixture since he started working at Beacon Systems and began to feel professionally valued again. "How was the big presentation?" he asked, closing his laptop and giving her his full attention. Emma set down her backpack and took a seat next to him on the couch. "Dad, I think today might have been the most important day of my career so far." Carlos raised an eyebrow. "That's a pretty significant statement. Tell me what happened." Emma walked him through the entire presentation, from her technical demonstrations to the questions from healthcare executives to the business cards and follow-up opportunities that had emerged from the meeting. Carlos listened with growing amazement as she described the level of professional interest her work was generating. "Emma, this is incredible," he said when she finished. "Regional Medical Center is one of the most respected healthcare systems in the region. If they implement your accessibility framework, it could influence adoption decisions throughout the industry." Emma nodded. "That's what Mr. Carter said. But Dad, there's something else I need to tell you about. Something that David and Jennifer proposed after the presentation." She explained the idea of establishing Rodriguez Consulting, emphasizing the potential for combining Carlos's business experience with her technical innovations and community connections. Carlos listened thoughtfully, asking questions about the practical details of transitioning from employment to entrepreneurship. "Emma," he said when she finished explaining the proposal, "this is a huge decision. Starting a consulting practice is a big risk, especially when we're both finally in stable professional situations." Emma had expected this response and had spent the bus ride home thinking about how to address her father's concerns. "Dad, what if it wasn't a big risk? What if we started small, taking on just 1 or 2 consulting projects while we both kept our current positions?" Carlos considered this suggestion. A gradual transition could work. It would give us time to learn about the business side of consulting without putting our financial security in jeopardy. Emma felt a surge of excitement. "So you think we should consider it?" Carlos smiled. "Emma, the idea of working professionally with you, of building something together that combines both of our strengths, that's incredibly appealing. But I want to make sure we think through all the implications before we commit to anything." They spent the rest of the evening discussing the practical aspects of establishing a consulting practice, from legal structures to client contracts, to the challenge of balancing collaborative work with their individual professional development. By the time they went to bed, both of them felt excited about the possibilities that lay ahead, while also acknowledging the complexity of the decisions they faced. The next morning, Emma woke up with a sense of anticipation that carried her through her classes at Lincoln Middle School and onto the bus that would take her to Meridian Tech Solutions for what might be one of her last days as a traditional intern consultant. The transition to Rodriguez Consulting would represent not just a business decision, but a fundamental shift in how she saw herself and her role in the technology industry. When she arrived at Meridian, David Carter was waiting for her with a folder full of materials related to the consulting proposal. "Emma, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I wanted to show you some concrete examples of what a partnership with Rodriguez Consulting might look like." He opened the folder and showed her draft contracts, project scopes, and financial projections that outlined how her accessibility work could expand into a sustainable business serving multiple healthcare organizations. The numbers were larger than anything Emma had imagined, representing not just income but impact on a scale that could affect hundreds of thousands of patients. "Mr. Carter," Emma said, studying the projections with growing amazement, "these numbers assume that we'll be working with clients across multiple states. Do you really think there's that much demand for accessibility consulting in healthcare?" David nodded. "Emma, what you've created here isn't just a better user interface. It's a methodology for inclusive design that addresses problems every healthcare organization is struggling with. The potential market for these services is enormous." Emma felt both thrilled and intimidated by the scope of opportunity that was opening up before her. At 12 years old, she was being offered the chance to build a business that could transform how healthcare technology served vulnerable populations. It was everything she had dreamed of and more than she had ever imagined possible. The decision about Rodriguez Consulting would shape not only her own future, but also her relationship with her father and their shared commitment to using technology as a force for good in the world. As Emma looked at the contracts and projections spread across David Carter's desk, she realized that she was standing at a threshold that would define the next phase of her life and career. 6 months later, Emma Rodriguez stood in the gleaming lobby of the newly opened Rodriguez Consulting headquarters, watching through floor-to-ceiling windows as her father directed the installation team positioning their company sign. The sleek glass offices on the 15th floor overlooked the same downtown district where her journey had begun. But everything had changed since that nervous 12-year-old had walked into Meridian Tech Solutions clutching a manila folder. The phone on the reception desk rang, and Emma answered with practiced professionalism. "Rodriguez Consulting, this is Emma speaking." "Emma, it's Dr. Patricia Nguyen from Beacon Systems. I wanted to congratulate you on the Healthcare Innovation Award announcement. Carlos must be incredibly proud." Emma smiled, glancing toward her father's corner office where he was reviewing contracts with their newest client, a rural hospital network implementing accessibility standards across 3 states. "Thank you, Dr. Nguyen. We're both still processing it." When they called to tell us Rodriguez Consulting had won the National Healthcare Technology Ethics Award, I thought someone was playing a prank. The award recognized their work developing technology solutions that prioritized patient dignity and accessibility over profit margins. In just 6 months, their small consulting firm had transformed the patient experience at 12 healthcare systems, improving medication compliance rates by an average of 53% and reducing technology-related patient complaints by 78%. Emma's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Kim at Meridian. Saw the news coverage about the award. "You two are changing the industry. Proud to have been part of your story." Their success had attracted attention from healthcare organizations nationwide, but Emma and Carlos had remained selective about their clients, choosing to work only with systems that demonstrated genuine commitment to serving vulnerable populations, rather than maximizing revenue. David Carter emerged from the conference room where he had been meeting with their legal team about expanding into pediatric healthcare technology. Despite leaving Meridian to become Rodriguez Consulting's chief technology officer, he maintained the same thoughtful approach that had first convinced Emma to trust his judgment. "Emma, the Children's Hospital Association just approved our proposal for the Youth Patient Engagement Platform. They want to start pilot testing next month in Boston, Atlanta, and Seattle. Emma felt the familiar thrill of knowing their work would soon help young patients navigate complex medical systems with greater confidence and understanding. That's incredible news, Mr. Carter. How many children will be part of the initial testing phase? Over 1,500 patients between ages 8 and 17. We'll be gathering feedback on everything from appointment scheduling to treatment, plan comprehension to privacy preferences for family involvement. Carlos joined them from his office, carrying printouts of media coverage about their recent award. The Washington Post wants to do a feature story about family businesses in healthcare technology. They're particularly interested in how we've maintained our focus on community-based user research while scaling to serve multiple states. Emma reviewed the interview request, noting the reporter's emphasis on their unconventional business model. Unlike traditional consulting firms that relied primarily on technical expertise, Rodriguez Consulting had built its reputation on deep community engagement and genuine partnership with end users. "I think we should do the interview," Emma said. "But I want to make sure they understand that our success comes from listening to people like Mrs. Chen and Carlos from my neighborhood, not from having some special insight that other developers lack." Their commitment to community-centered design had become Rodriguez Consulting's signature approach, with each new client engagement beginning with extensive user research in real-world settings rather than corporate focus groups or laboratory testing environments. The office door chimed as Jennifer Walsh arrived for their weekly strategy meeting, carrying coffee and the satisfied expression of someone whose former intern had exceeded every possible expectation. "Emma, I just finished reviewing the preliminary data from regional medical centers' implementation. Patient satisfaction scores have improved by 41% since they adopted your accessibility framework." Emma pulled up the detailed analytics on her laptop, studying patterns in user behavior that revealed how small interface changes could have profound impacts on patient experience. The most encouraging trend is the increase in patients completing their full treatment protocols. When people feel confident navigating the technology, they're more likely to follow through with their care plans. Carlos spread architectural diagrams across the conference table, showing their plans for expanding into mental health technology and addiction recovery support systems. "We've got 3 pilot programs starting next quarter, all focused on reducing stigma and improving access to care through better digital interfaces." The scope of their work had grown beyond Emma's wildest childhood dreams, but the core mission remained unchanged, using technology to empower people rather than overwhelm them, especially those who had traditionally been underserved by healthcare systems. David reviewed his tablet showing their financial projections for the coming year. Rodriguez Consulting is on track to generate $2.3 million in revenue by next December, with profit margins that reflect our focus on sustainable growth over rapid expansion. Emma felt a moment of vertigo thinking about the numbers. 2 years ago, she had been excited to earn $400 a month from her individual apps. Now she was co-owner of a consulting firm that was transforming healthcare technology across the country. "The important thing is that we're creating real value," she said. "Every dollar we earn represents improved experiences for patients who deserve better from their healthcare technology." Their afternoon was spent reviewing proposals from potential clients, each requiring careful evaluation to ensure alignment with Rodriguez Consulting's values and capabilities. Emma had learned to identify organizations that were genuinely committed to patient-centered care versus those that were primarily interested in appearing innovative for marketing purposes. This proposal from Metro Healthcare Systems concerns ME, Emma said, reviewing their request for accessibility consulting. "They're asking us to make their existing interfaces compliant with federal guidelines, but they don't want to invest in user research or community testing." "That's exactly the approach we've proven doesn't work." Carlos nodded, making notes on his copy of the proposal. We've learned that technical compliance without user engagement creates systems that check regulatory boxes, but don't actually improve patient experiences. Jennifer suggested a modified approach. What if we counter-propose a smaller pilot project that demonstrates the value of community-based user research? If they see the results, they might be willing to invest in the full methodology. Emma considered this strategy. That could work, but only if we're clear from the beginning about what meaningful accessibility requires. I don't want to compromise our standards just to win a contract. The conversation was interrupted by a video call from Mrs. Patterson, one of their original community testing participants, calling from Regional Medical Center where she was using the patient portal they had helped design. Emma, dear, I wanted to tell you that I just scheduled my own follow-up appointments for the next 6 months, and I even updated my insurance information without needing help from my daughter. 2 years ago, I couldn't figure out how to check my email, and now I feel like a technology expert. Emma felt tears prick her eyes. Mrs. Patterson, that's exactly why we do this work. You were always capable of managing your own care. We just needed to build technology that matched your capabilities instead of assuming you needed to change to accommodate the technology. After the call ended, the room was quiet for a moment as everyone reflected on the human impact of their technical work. Awards and revenue growth were gratifying, but stories like Mrs. Patterson's were what made their long hours and complex problem-solving feel meaningful. Carlos looked at his daughter with an expression of profound pride mixed with amazement. Emma, when you walked into that job interview 2 years ago, did you have any idea it would lead to this? Emma considered the question seriously. I knew I wanted to build technology that helped people. I knew I wanted to work with smart, ethical people who cared about solving real problems. But I never imagined we'd be able to create something this significant together. David smiled. The combination of your technical innovation, Carlos's business experience, and your shared commitment to community engagement has created something unique in the healthcare technology industry. Jennifer pulled out her phone to show them a social media post from Dr. Rodriguez at Regional Medical Center. 2 years ago, a 12-year-old consultant taught our team that accessibility isn't about compliance, it's about dignity. Today, Rodriguez Consulting won a national award for proving that ethical technology development is also good business. Proud to have been part of this journey. As the afternoon meeting concluded, Emma found herself standing at the office windows, looking out at the city where her unusual career had begun. The view included the Meridian building where she had first presented her apps to professional developers, the community center where she still conducted user research with elderly residents, and the coffee shop where she and her father had planned their transition from employees to entrepreneurs. Carlos joined her at the window. Any regrets about the path we chose? Emma shook her head. The only thing I regret is waiting so long to apply for that first internship. Imagine what we could have accomplished if I'd been brave enough to try earlier. You were brave enough exactly when you needed to be, Carlos said. And everything that's happened since then has been built on that initial act of courage. Their phones buzzed simultaneously with a news alert. Rodriguez Consulting announces partnership with Department of Veterans Affairs to improve healthcare technology access for disabled veterans. Emma grinned. I guess our afternoon meeting ran longer than we thought. The VA partnership announcement wasn't supposed to go out until tomorrow. The Veterans Affairs project represented their largest contract to date, with potential to impact over 2 million veterans accessing healthcare through digital systems designed with their specific needs and challenges in mind. Emma, Carlos said, when I was unemployed and struggling to find work, I used to imagine what it would feel like to be professionally successful again. But I never imagined success that felt this meaningful. Emma hugged her father, thinking about how their lives had been transformed by her decision to apply for a position she wasn't technically qualified for, and his willingness to support her unconventional career path. Dad, the best part isn't the awards or the money or even the impact we're having. The best part is that we get to do this work together, building something that matters while staying true to the values you taught me. As the sun set over the downtown skyline, Emma Rodriguez reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought them to this moment. A nervous 12-year-old with big dreams and bigger determination had become a nationally recognized expert in accessible healthcare technology. More importantly, she had discovered that success meant not just achieving her own goals, but creating opportunities for her father to rebuild his career and for vulnerable patients to access healthcare with dignity. The phone rang again, another client seeking their help in making healthcare technology more human and more humane. Emma answered with the confidence of someone who had learned that age was less important than insight, that technical skills mattered less than ethical commitment, and that the most powerful innovations came from listening to the people who needed them most. Rodriguez Consulting was no longer just a business. It had become a testament to what was possible when talent was recognized, regardless of conventional expectations, when integrity was valued over profit, and when families chose to build something meaningful together. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.